Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Betsie Chacko, and I am the Associate Director for CISA International at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, known as CISA. I am joined by my colleague, Dr. Patricia Soler, who is with CISA's Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative and leads our international CERT efforts. I want to thank our partners at CCN CERT, INSEBE, OAS, and the Government of Colombia for the gracious invite today. It is an absolute joy to meet and make new friends here today. If I can go to the next slide, hopefully. Green? There we go. Excellent. Thank you. So CISA is, and over the next few minutes, I will share what the role of CISA is and some of our initiatives. CISA is one of the newest federal US government agencies. We are a different federal agency. Our mission is simple. We lead the national effort to understand and manage cyber and physical risk to our critical national infrastructure. And while this mission may seem simple on the surface, it's challenging to execute with significant consequences if we fail. It's our responsibility to protect the functions and essential services of government and the private sector that are so vital to the United States that their disruption, corruption, and dysfunction would have a damaging effect on our security. CISA is responsible for protecting the US critical infrastructure from both the physical and cyber threats. This includes the water we drink, the electricity that lights our home, and the gas we get the fuel pumps from. Through this work, we take on some of the biggest challenges facing both the government and industry, from securing large federal networks to responding to incidents and private organizations, to working with state and local partners to secure our elections. As we work to address the threats facing our nation's infrastructure, partnerships are our strength, and the success of CISA's mission rests squarely on these partnerships. And these partnerships are very vital in protecting our critical infrastructure. Though CISA is the US federal agency lead for critical infrastructure, across the 16 sectors, there we go, each sector has a very unique characteristic, operating model, and risk profile. Thus, the US designates various sector risk management agencies within the federal government that align with their knowledge and expertise. Of the 16 critical infrastructures in the US, CISA is the only sector risk management agency for 8 of them. For example, the energy sector is led by the Department of Energy. The financial sector is led by the Department of Treasury, and so on. Additionally, the majority of our infrastructure is owned and operated by the private sector. Only by working together across all levels of government and industry can we truly build the type of collective defense needed to protect our nation's infrastructure from the countless number of threats we're facing today. However, the threats we see today are global, and there are no borders in nature. CISA's international partnerships are critical to ensuring the security and resiliency of our nation's digital and physical infrastructure. With the release of CISA's first international strategy, known as CISA Global, my office spearheads our agency's 4 international goals to first, advance operational collaboration, second, build partner capacity, third, strengthen our collaboration through stakeholder engagement and outreach. And lastly, shape the policy ecosystem. Just to touch on the first 2 goals briefly, starting with advancing operational cooperation. We want to increase our situational awareness to be able to better assess and counter the evolving risks. The bread and butter of this area is our CERT function. On the global stage, we are building, sustaining, and advancing relationships with CERTs worldwide to prevent, protect, and mitigate and manage risks. Every CERT has a unique set of eyes and ears, and we want to see what you're seeing and vice versa. We are grateful for the CERT-to-CERT line of communications with our international partners, including all of you here today. As part of the Americas, and as a member of the OAS CCERT Americas network, CISA is committed to increasing its operational collaboration with our CERT counterparts in the region. In regards to the second goal of capacity building, we want to continue to build our partners' capacity and increase their capabilities in the cyber and critical infrastructure realms. Thanks to our great partnership with the US Department of State and OAS and others, we are looking for opportunities to strengthen the overall cyber ecosystem. The tragic attacks of Ukraine is a key example of how we must strive to work together to share information to increase our defensive posture. We have been working closely with our partners to gather, analyze, and further share information on ongoing malicious cyber activities related to the attacks in Ukraine, and to provide guidance and recommendations to our stakeholders to adopt a stronger cybersecurity posture through our Shields Up webpage. Shields Up provides actionable information on urgent steps to harden systems given the heightened threat environment. The webpage includes the latest alerts, including the advisory on the destructive malware affecting Ukraine, guidance for CEOs, and steps every individual can take to improve their cyber hygiene, a list of free cybersecurity services and tools to critical infrastructure partners of all sizes, and guidance on how organizations can prepare themselves to mitigate against the impact of potential foreign influence operations of mis, dis, and malinformation. As we continue to work with our government, industry, and international partners to ensure critical infrastructure resilience, I will now hand the floor over to Dr. Soler to show how CISA is driving progress in these areas.
Hello, everybody, and good morning. Thank you, Betsie, for your comments. I have to say that it is wonderful to be here, and thank you for the invitation. We're truly honored. I moved to Washington, D.C. in 1999, and my first week in Washington, D.C., for some reason, my professor took us to the Organization of American States building. So it was one of my first experiences living in DC, where I currently live now, to see that beautiful building and get a tour of an art exhibit that was there at the time. So it's just truly wonderful to be here. That memory has stuck with me all these years. And likewise, thank you also to Columbia for being such wonderful hosts. I've never been here before. So it's fantastic to get to know other parts of the Americas. As Betsie mentioned in her comments, I am Dr. Patricia Soler, and I am responsible for the CERTs functions within the Cybersecurity Division of CISA. And one of the goals that I want to talk about today and priorities are lines of communication, because information is really our most valuable material, and it does us no good if we do not share it with our CERT counterparts overseas. So, as Betsie mentioned, I am now part of a greater initiative within CISA called the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. And it really is amplifying CISA's ongoing work with the private sector to enhance it, to formalize it, and to really work together. So it's not to say that this is completely new work, but it's definitely an enhancement, a formalization of work that we were already doing with the US private sector. And this work is one of our director's #1 priorities, and I'll get to hear a little bit some of the more details of the companies that are a part of the JCDC, but it really is to unify cyber defense planning across the United States. And we do that by working with our interagency partners, so different federal agencies that have different responsibilities for cybersecurity, and likewise our state, local, tribal, and territorial partners, and our industry partners, and of course our federal sector partners. So we have many partners, And the key is to share information with each other and to maximize that information sharing. I would say that on my team, 95% of the information that we work with is not classified. And that's very important because if it's classified, you cannot share it, or you can share it with a very few number of people. And so our goal is always to get things declassified so we can still send something valuable and timely to as many people as possible. And that includes our overseas partners. Right now, we have about 110 CERT counterparts, email addresses, and also PGP keys to send information. And so that's a constant goal of mine, is to validate those email addresses, validate POCs. As we know, personnel change. So if you're not getting emails, that's something that I would like to talk about and make sure that we have the correct contact information for you, the correct PGP keys, and those come in handy. We send out a lot of alerts and advisories, but one thing that we also send out are victim notifications. And what do I mean by victim notifications? Sometimes we get really good tips from the US private sector. It could be anybody. It could be another part of the government that has information about a private company overseas. What do we do with that information? We send it to the CERT and say, hey, we have some information about a potential cyber attack that's going to happen to this company in your country. And we encrypt that information. We will never reach out to that company directly. That's not our job. We would prefer that the CERT do something with that information. So it's very important, these lines of communication and knowing who each other are, and to have the correct PGP information to make sure that we're sharing information with the correct CERT. And that's always another question too, is what is that CERT's responsibilities within the country? I know that we've talked about during this conference that some CERTs have responsibilities just for the military, some have just for the private sector, for the public sector, or just for federal. And so having that information, we can get the information to the correct CERT that has that authority. So one of the goals of the JCDC is also to move into more of a planning position and to not always be reacting to something. And that's the target state of working together to be more proactive instead of, okay, what is the fire of today? What's the disaster happening right now? And to actually start planning in advance for things. So as I mentioned, we have these members of the JCDC and are coordinating across these partners. And this is a relatively new effort. As I mentioned, we have been working with the private sector for like a long time, but now it's more formalized. And it also means including international partners. And so in these communications that we send out, sometimes we say trusted third party. So we're not exactly telling you where we got the information from, and it could be from any of these entities, but they have given us permission to share. And we encourage sharing information, because again, it cannot help people if you do not share it. So these are the companies that are the first 20 that have officially joined the JCDC. And this is what I talk about when I say it's a little bit more formalized right now. So these are all US-based companies that are headquartered in the United States, and they are the big internet technology companies. We will gradually add more companies, but you have to start kind of small. You don't want too many people involved. And one of the lessons learned over the past year or so is that you also just want the analysts. You don't want the CEOs. You don't want the high-level leadership. You need the technical people that can understand the information and also prioritize. Because right now, what we're seeing, especially with events overseas, is that there's a lot of information, and we need to process it, prioritize it accordingly. So we have formal agreements with these companies, and we have an established Slack channel, and we talk to them daily about different cyber incidents taking place, with them sharing information. And what's interesting is, as you can see, a lot of them are each other's competitors, right? So they cannot take information from the US government and turn it into a competitive advantage. That's not really what this is. We don't really care how they got the information, what technology they used. We don't really talk about what kind of cloud platform did you use to decipher this information. It's more the IOCs, the TTPs, the unique insights, the context, and it becomes a safer place to talk about these topics, about cybersecurity, because they have global interests too. These are multinational companies with a lot of stakeholders in your countries, and they care about what's happening internationally. And that information can be very valuable for them. And so we're currently starting out, and it's been, I'd say, the last month or so, asking CERTs that send us information, hey, can we also have permission to share with the JCDC in this alliance construct that has been created? And we don't have to mention the country's name. We don't have to say where it came from. It's a trusted third party. So we're in this environment of building trust and sharing valuable information and unique information in a timely and effective manner so that somebody can do something with it and make it actionable. So I mentioned the word trust. Trust is so important. You can sign so many different agreements, but if you don't have trust at the end of the day, you are not going to be able to successfully deliver on your mission. And one of the things that we have been prioritizing the past year, especially within my division, and I heard a lot earlier today and from some of you yesterday, the problem of personnel. And this past year, really the CERT functions was with one person. And I joined CISA last year. My anniversary was a few days ago, my one-year anniversary at CISA. And our team has grown. And for that reason, we are now being more proactive in terms of reaching out to more of you. We've prioritized adding more and more CERTs to our email distribution lists so you get our information. And we always welcome your feedback. We can update our publications. If you have unique IOCs or TTPs, these are living documents. We changed our solar winds guidance many times, probably at least 5 times, because we had more information that we were receiving that were unique IOCs or TTPs that we previously didn't know. And so that information is always extremely valuable to us if you have a unique insight and want to share it with us. And the fostering of good intentions is just information. It's not political. It is technical information that we are sharing with our CERT counterparts overseas in order to enhance the cyber ecosystem, because it's in everybody's interest if we all are protected from cyber attacks. And so, how do we do this? With all of this information, we have to make decisions daily in operations, sometimes by the minute. Is it relevant and is it good? Is it good information and do people care about this? And that's what we try to prioritize, what we share. And I will say that it's still a learning process. I mentioned how, one of the lessons learned is not to have executives involved too heavily, but you do want your technical analysts involved to understand the cyber risks and to, again, start planning with these resources to prevent something from taking place, right? We only hear about things in the news when something bad has happened, and it's rare that you hear the good news stories that, hey, we were able to prevent something from taking place. But that's really where we want our maturity model to move to with our processes. And the common understanding of processes is really important because these companies that I mentioned, they don't know what TLP white means. So it's also an education process for them of them understanding how CERTs operate in terms of the level of information sharing. Our private sector had no idea what this terminology meant. And so it's an education of this is what's TLP white, this is what's TLP green, amber, red, and also permissions around sharing. And a lot of it has to do with those definitions from first.org, but also trust. And it takes some time for them to become familiar with the terminology that this industry uses so that they are more comfortable with putting things, hey, you know what? You may think that's super sensitive, but we don't think that's sensitive. We can share it, and encouraging them to share more information. So a couple of other services that I want to mention, and really the JCDC, the goal is for it to be a service, not just domestically, but internationally, to utilize these gigantic companies where we all have a great interest and have them help protect the cyber ecosystem, all of us working together. And I want to mention a couple other services too, that we have an automated indicator sharing tool with our internal stakeholders, domestic stakeholders, but also international partners. So if that's of interest, happy to send anybody a link on that to sign up. We also offer cyber hygiene services, and that is something that is also available to international partners. And one thing that's not on the slide is we also have a malware analysis team. And so you can send them samples of malware. It's been very interesting past couple of weeks. We got 3 samples of live malware accidentally emailed directly to us. And we're, no, do not email it. It needs to go to this specific team for them to process it. So we have that resource available too. And what's great about that team is that they have an ability, depending on how much work they have, to provide a rapid analysis within a few days. So it's kind of like a draft that they can share about the malware. And they do get a lot that's benign sometimes, where it's just not malware. But it's always good to have them check. So that's another service that we offer. And we have here highlighted our website, stopransomware.gov, where there are a ton of materials on our web pages intended for all types of audiences. So it could be for your school system, for your educators. What should schools for young children be doing to prevent cyber attacks? What should small businesses be doing to prevent cyber attacks? It's not very technical. It's things for the everyday person, depending on their industry, for them to reference and to use as a resource. So I highly recommend looking at this. There's also one for CEOs, how to talk to your company about to prevent cyber attack, or how to make investments, or hey, maybe we should get a contract to get some cybersecurity protection in place. And so I mentioned that that webpage, but also just on our CISA webpage, we have so many materials. And if you're ever interested in translating them and putting them on your own web pages, we encourage that. And we have a disclaimer, a paragraph we can send you saying that, hey, CISA didn't make this translation, but we want you to use these resources because we produce so much information. And a lot of it's available on our websites. So, and I'm gonna skip over this. We'll talk a little bit about this more in terms of when I get to the cyber EO. But again, we want to be in the position where I mentioned how we want to be more proactive, but when we do react to a cyber incident, we all want to be working together in a manner that makes sense and not in a blind panic where people are talking to different people and no one knows what's going on. So this is also an enhanced coordination when something does take place. And I have to say, anecdotally, I would argue that there was some resistance in the private sector to this model, to this type of participation. And I think a lot of that changed after the Colonial Pipeline incident, where companies are realizing that it's not an if, but a when this happens, and it's better to all work together to the best of our abilities, and to also be coordinating in a way that makes sense, and to not hide the fact that you've been a victim of ransomware. That can cause more problems down the road. So planning and coordination, but then also looking to what can we do more proactively as a government to prevent these things from happening in the first place. So one thing that's very important that I'll touch upon, I mentioned PGP keys. So we're always very careful with the type of information we have. So if there's personally identifiable information, such as names, business addresses, we'll always send that using our PGP key. That's just one of our processes that we use. And we know how to shield that information. We don't want it going out over regular email. And that's why we have a lot of internal protocols for handling that information, like the malware analysis team. You need to handle the information appropriately because you don't want to accidentally create an incident within your own network. And I mentioned the resources on our website. One thing I'll mention here too is one thing that we do quite a bit is we'll see something in the news taking place in a country, especially if it has to do with the country's federal sector or critical infrastructure, so like oil or water. And we're very interested in that type of information. And we'll email a country, the CERT, and we'll say, hey, can you provide us any more insights about this information that are not publicly known? And I make this offer to you that if you see something in the news that you see that is impacting the United States and you are interested in learning more information, please send us an email requesting information. We may have something that we can share with you that is not publicly known, respecting TLP protocols about information sharing. So it works both ways, and we want to enhance that collaboration, especially now that we have a few more people that we can dedicate to this type of international collaboration. And a little bit about cyber resiliency. I know that some previous presentations touched upon this. So when the attack happens, and the question of the if versus the when, timing is so important. And I think we all know that the faster you can move and respond, the better. And that's why it's important to be as transparent as possible when these things do take place and not be secretive. And am hopeful that this model of the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative encourages other parts of industry to be more in a mindset to share proactively. We do also have some new legislation about mandatory reporting. So there's a lot of interest in this space, but we want folks to be proactive and anticipate threats rather than doing nothing and then asking the US government for help when something does take place. And this also helps us as a CERT understand where the weaknesses are and put our energy where it needs to be. And this is also, again, going back to the topic of prioritization. We always care about the federal sector at the highest level of prioritization. We need to protect our government, but we also care about critical infrastructure. And if we see something happening in another country, like, hey, your guys' like financial department got hit by ransomware. We are interested in that kind of information because it helps us be a better CERT for our own country, to be sharing that information to protect each other's priorities. So I'm going to go into a little bit on the executive order. And this has to do with a lot of new regulations in place from the White House on improving really our nation's cybersecurity. And there's some great language in this executive order and also in the more recent mandatory reporting requirements. And it's really about the visibility. Like, do not hide the fact that you are a victim of ransomware. Don't worry about your brand or your clients judging you. I mean, I know those are all concerns, but the concern is also, if this is a state-sponsored attack, we need to know about it. Who did it? Is it a criminal actor? Is it a kid, like a 13-year-old? Or is it something like truly concerning from a nation-sponsored actor? And this also means advancing response capabilities, so incident response, and encouraging these security practices to take place, that there's important things that one can do before something takes place. And that's where CISA is really at the heart of all of this. We have a lot of responsibilities for implementing this executive order from the Biden-Harris administration. And so I'm just going to touch on a few things. And the one thing I want to talk about that was mentioned earlier today was software bill of materials. So in our vulnerability management team within the cybersecurity division, we now have more resources dedicated to software bill of materials, SBOM. And if you don't know what that is, think of when you like buy something, like the list of ingredients on the back of the package. That's really what we want for software, is what is in it. Because we know we don't have a lot of visibility into supply chains. And when a vulnerability pops up, especially with open source software, we don't know who all is impacted. So we're working a lot on this, on software bill of materials, and we're working very closely with the CERTs in Japan and also Germany. So if there's interest in this, please let us know. Our vulnerability management team is a great team, and they also update weekly. There's a link for the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, and it's updated weekly for known exploited vulnerabilities. So that's public information. So those are things I wanted to touch on in terms of resources, and also to see if there's interest in participating in driving the adoption of software bill of materials. Industry, it depends on which industry, but it's very hard to do and to implement something like that. And not all industry wants to do it because it's very hard and expensive to find out, well, in this car, what are all the ingredients? What's in here in terms of your IT software? So that's one of our ongoing projects. The other thing I'll mention too is that we did produce these playbooks for the management of vulnerability and incidents across our federal sector, and those are published, they're done. And so if you would like to use them as resources, they're really well done. Those are also publicly available documents for what should you do. It's sort of like a course of action. How do you respond? How do you react? And so I will mention that a lot of the information that we do share, our primary audience is our federal sector. However, we share it with our international CERT partners because we know you care too about your federal sectors and what potentially could be useful to apply in your own countries. And with the federal sector, one thing I'll mention too, and I know we all suffer from this a little bit depending on the sort of agency, but we're also improving the detection of vulnerabilities with different types of scanning and newer technologies. We do have older IT systems, legacy systems that are using older technology. So this, in effect, is really trying to get our federal sector, which is huge, really on the same page when it comes to cybersecurity and best practices, and to understand these topics also. So when the Office of the Chief Information Officer, whoever's responsible for these responses within the federal agencies, also has a really good understanding of cybersecurity. And so this is a large undertaking given how big our federal sector is and how each agency is a little bit different to really sort of enhance their capabilities, but also their education and knowledge of what to do. So here's some contact information for you in terms of how to get a hold of us. And I know a lot of you, with my colleague Christine, have her WhatsApp contact information, but we also have this email address that please feel free to reach out. As I mentioned, it's really important for us to have the correct contact information. We send about 2 to 3 alerts and advisories a week. And so if you are not familiar with what I'm talking about, maybe we have an old email address for you. Maybe you're a newer CERT and don't have access to this information yet, but we push it out constantly. Relevant information that we think is relevant. And we're always interested in your feedback. So if you're like, that was not helpful at all, that's old information, please tell us. Or if you did find it helpful, we'd like to know. We know, and we're very aware of the fact that a lot of this stuff is not in Spanish. It's not in Portuguese. And so that's something that we're going to take back to DC, is that, hey, we need to have our materials in more languages to make them more accessible to more parts of the world with our international partners, and not just have like the one person who can read it and digest it, but then how do you share it further than within your own countries? So we understand those limitations, and we'll work on that to try to improve our information sharing. And in the meantime, there's Google Translate, and that's like the worst recommendation ever. But if you do need to look at something quickly, that's always a potential resource while we try to work this out and get better communications in the appropriate languages for the Americas. So with that, thank you so much for your time today. Really enjoyed talking to everybody, and happy to stay in touch with any questions or feedback that you may have. Thank you, guys.